Okay, so good morning, all. So I would be recording day three of Java Basics session. Uh, so in this session, we would be covering some methods of string class, very important in terms of understanding these concepts, because a lot of Java programming interview related questions revolve around this topic. So it's a very important topic. There are very useful inbuilt string methods that are there, which we can use it in our programming. So we will see a few of them in today's session, and then I plan to cover uh, starting with the OOP concepts today, wherein I will mention what is a class, what is an attribute, what is a method, right? And I will probably touch base on OOP concepts, inheritance, and I will cover single inheritance for today. Okay, so that is the plan for today's session, and let's get started without any further ado. So I will quickly create a class under day three project that I've already created, and let me name it as string class, right? I will have this public static void main checkbox selected. I'll click on finish, and let's jump into the string method that is there. So till now we have seen that how to declare a string variable, isn't it? So we mentioned the data type as string. We mention the variable name. So let's say I mention here as value. Okay, and let's say I mention this is Java programming, right? So this is a string variable which has this value stored in it. This is Java programming, right? So if you remember, in our previous session we mentioned about primitive data type and non-primitive data type, right? And string belongs to the non-primitive data type, meaning it is not just a data type, but it is actually a class, an inbuilt class of Java, which has different methods which we can use for our programming. Okay, so what is a class, what is a method, we will see that in the next topic. But just as a very high level explanation of what is a class and what is a method. So basically a class is nothing but a placeholder where you would write different methods or functions inside it. Okay, and how do you access the methods of a particular class? You can access it by creating an instance of that class, and you can press a full stop to see the different methods that are there inside that particular class. Okay, so now for example, here we have declared this string variable by the name value, which has this value as this is Java programming, right? So now let us see, if I mention value and if I press this full stop or a dot, right? So we will see what are the different inbuilt methods that are there in this particular class. So as you can see, all these methods that are available, these are all inbuilt string methods, which are developed by the Java developers, and we can make use of all of these. Okay, so we will see around 8 to 10 methods in today's session, but if you want to see the remaining ones, you can do it as a homework, because there are plenty of them, literally plenty of them. So we will not be able to cover all of them today, but I'll just touch base upon some basic and the important one. So now, like for example, if I want to know what is the length of this particular string, okay, so meaning how many characters are there inside this string, there is a method by the name, okay, there is a method by the name length, right? So this length method, it is going to return me the length in the integer format. Okay, so let me show you again. So if you see here, this particular method is going to return me a value which would be of data type int. It has mentioned, it's mentioned over here, isn't it? So I will say length, and since it is returning a value, right, I need to store that value in a variable, right? So what is the return type of this particular method? As I showed you, it was showing as int, isn't it? So now I have to store this value in a variable of data type int, right? So I would say str len, correct, string length. And now if I run this, and let's say if I want to print this value, I would say the length of the string is, I will say str len. So what I've done is simple. I've created a string variable. I've given it some value in double quotes. Then I wanted to find out what is the length of this particular string. Okay, so how do I get it? I would get it by using the dot length method, an inbuilt method of string class. And since it is returning a value in an integer format, I have to store it in an integer variable. Okay. Now I am just printing that value which has been returned using the system.out.println method, and I'm mentioning that variable which is storing that return value over here. So now what it should print? It should print the length of the string is, whatever the length is. So now if I have to show you, since the length starts from 1, so let's say at index number 1 we have the character T, then index number 2 it is H, right, so on and so forth. So 1 2 3 4 5, at position number 5 there is a blank space, right? Although it is blank, but it is counted, right? It has some length, isn't it? So 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13 14 15 16 17 18 19 20 21 22 23 24. So the expected output is the length of the string is 24. Now let's see if it works as expected or not. Here we go. It has printed exactly what we are expecting. The length of the string is 24. Now let's say, there is something at index number 10. Okay. You want to know what is the character at index number 10 in this particular string. So what I would use, it is character at, char at, and if you see in the bracket, right, it is expecting you some integer value. So if you see, char at is the method name, and in the bracket, it is expecting some argument which would be an integer data type argument, and based on that it would return you a value which would be of data type char or character, right? So now let's see this. So I'll say char at, and I want to know what is the character at index number 10, right? So I can again store this in a char variable and then use system.out.println in the next line. Or what you can simply do is you can just have this return value directly printed in system.out.println statement itself. So I would say character at index number 10 is, right. So you can either store the return value and into an variable and then print it in the system.out.println statement, or you can directly mention this in the print statement itself, right? So this is the easier way to do that, isn't it? So now what are we expecting? uh, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10. So I think at 10 index we have the value as a, isn't it? So let us see if, if it returns a or not. Okay, so it is returning v. Okay, let me just confirm again. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10. Okay. All right, so let me just 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Okay, let me just cross check if I mention 24, what it returns. Okay, string index out of range. Fine. So I understood what the issue is. It's not an issue, but it is, something that I misunderstood. So the length, to count the length of the string, it starts with, 1 2 3 length of the, string variable. You have to count it from starting from 1. Okay. However, for the remaining methods, like in terms of, a character at or whatever, the index starts with 0, right? So now, since the length of the string was 24, and if I expect the index 24 to return me the value as g, that is incorrect, because the index will always start with 0. Okay, so at index 0 it is t, right? So it start one number less than the actual length of the string, right? So that is why if I mention 24, it is giving me index out of range. However, if I mention it as 23, and if I run it now, it will give me the output as character G. Okay, so let's run it and see. Yeah, it is returning G. So that is why when I mention index 10 over here, and I, by mistake, I was expecting the value to be, uh, you know, A, right? Uh, Let us see again. One index number 0 is T, one index is H, 2 index is I, 3 index is S, 4 index is, a space, 5 index is I, 6 index is S again, 7 index is blank space, 8 index is J, 9 index is A, and 10th index is V, right? So now it should give me the output as V, right? So if I execute this, it is correctly giving me it as V, right? So only for length we have to start with, value 1, because you can't have, length mentioned as 0, right? It is only one letter in that string, right? It doesn't make sense. Length cannot be 0, length has to start from 1, right? So that is why for counting the length of that string, they don't consider it as 0 as the starting point. However, for, methods like char at, the index will start from 0, and accordingly, it will display you, whatever character is at that particular index. Okay, so let's move ahead. Value dot, there is another important method which is called as contains. So again, if you want to know what is that contains, input parameter, what it is going to return. So what it is telling you, it is telling you it is expecting a character sequence, or you can say a string as an argument, and it is going to return you the value as boolean. Okay, so boolean means either true or false, right? So if I say contains, and if I mention, let's say Java, right? And if I say system out dot println, uh, check if Java exists in the string. Okay. Now, if I execute this, it should return me as true. Okay. So what basically I'm doing is I'm just checking whether this particular string Java exists in this main string or not. If it exists, as what I've mentioned over here, then it will return me the value as true. If I mention something like, let's say Java T, right? So it will not exist, right? Although Java exists, but this word as a whole doesn't exist in this particular string, isn't it? So it should obviously return me the value as false. So if I execute this now, it should give me the value as false, right? So this is about the contains method. Let's proceed further. Value dot, okay. And as I said, there are plenty of methods. So, I don't have time to cover all of them, but I'll quickly show you some of them. So let's say I use, this method, index of, correct, which accepts a string parameter and it is going to return me the value as integer, correct. So if I say value dot index of and I give a value, let's say is, okay. Now what is going to happen is that it is going to check whether this particular substring exists in this particular string or not. If it exists, and it will first check only the first occurrence of this particular string, substring. Okay, so let's say this particular substring exists multiple times in this main string, right? So it will not it will not tell you how many times this particular occurrence or this particular substring occur in this particular main string, but it will just check for the first instance and it will tell you what is the index or what is the index of the starting point of this substring. Meaning, now let's say this substring is, how many times do you see this is in this main string? You see it twice, right? So first it is there in the first word this, and then it also is there as a second word is, correct. But now this index of will not search for the second instance. The moment it receives or the moment it sees that this particular substring exists at this particular point, it is going to stop the execution and it will return you the index where it exists. So what is the index of this occurrence? 0, 1 and 2. At point number 2 or index number 2, it has found this substring successfully and it will stop the execution over here and it will return you the value as 2. Okay, so again we will see this sys out is substring is occurs at index number, right? What are we expecting? It exists at index number 2, right? 0, 1 and 2, correct. So it should return me the index value as 2, isn't it? Right, so this is working fine. So now let's say you want to check, just to give you an idea, if I add a space over here, okay. So now what is a substring? The substring is space and then is, correct. So now this particular is doesn't fit in the criteria that I'm searching, right? Because there is no space before this is. isn't it? So it will search for the next occurrence, and it will be able to find this substring at index number 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Correct? So if I execute this now, it is giving me the output as index number 4. Okay. So again, this is a very, very uh, common question, interview question. So they will give you a string like this. Okay, I myself have asked this question a lot when I take interviews for candidates who have experience of 3 to 4 years of Java. This is a very simple basic program that I give just to get an idea whether they are actually hands-on on automation or not, because you find a lot of resumes that they say that they are good in Java programming, blah blah blah. But if you really want to know whether they are actually good in coding or not, this is a very simple basic problem statement that I give. And I tell them that, tell me, the number of occurrences of this substring is in this main string, right? So now you have to you know uh, add your logic using this method, index of. Definitely you have to use this method index of, correct? But as I said, it will give you only the first occurrence. So now you have to rack your brain and figure out how would you use this method so that it will give you the multiple occurrences of the string. So maybe you can take this as a homework and you see if you are able to solve this problem. Okay, so anyways, let's proceed further. We will see some more methods. So value dot. Okay, so we have seen contains, we have seen uh okay, let me show you equals ignore case. Okay, before that, probably I'll show you what is equals. Okay, so I will say equals, and I will mention uh this is Java programming. Okay, so I have some same content like what I have over here, but this is in some different uppercase, lowercase kind of a thing, right? So Java is a case sensitive language. If you remember, I mentioned that in day one of our session, right? So now, although the content, or you can say the text, is the same, but since the case is not matching, this dot equals is going to return me the boolean value as false. Value dot equals this doesn't match. Correct? So now let me show you this first. This out. Check if value, sorry, value matches. Okay, we'll say, all right. So now if I execute this, you will say false. It is not matching. Okay. So now there is another method which says equals, but this time I'm saying ignore case. Okay. So I'm telling Java, you don't bother about the case, just check whether the text content matches or not. Okay, so now what do you expect? What is the value it is going to return? It is going to return me true, right? Because the text content is the same, although the case doesn't match. So that's fine, right? So if you want to compare two strings, and if you don't want to really bother what case it is, uppercase, lowercase, and if you want to compare the content only, then you make sure you use this equals ignore case, right? So if I execute this now, it is going to return me the value as true, right? But obviously, if there is any change or mismatch in the content, if I add some extra spaces, so then it is going to return you the value as false. That's as simple as that. Correct? It just ignores the case. It doesn't ignore match content difference. Let's proceed further. Value dot mm, we have seen index of, so that's fine. Length also we have seen. Okay. So we will see what is replace. Okay. Again, replace is good example. So let's say uh, I have to mention that I want to replace uh, Java with, let's say, Python. Okay, in this particular string value that I have. Okay, so what I will say is value dot replace what? Java. Okay, and then I'll say Python. Okay, right? And I forgot what is the return type in this case. Replace. It is going to replace and return you the value as string, isn't it? Okay, so fair enough. I will just print the value, the new string. I would say new string is okay. Right. So now, what do you expect the output to be? It is first going to check whether this substring exists in the first place or not. If it exists, okay, it is going to replace it with Python. Okay, so now if I execute this, what is the output? This is Python programming, correct? Now let's say if I want to replace the space, whatever space value, I want to replace it with, let's say, an underscore. Now let's see what happens. So now in this case, wherever it finds space, it is going to replace it. So it will not replace only the first instance, right? It is going to replace all the instances if it is able to find that instance in the first place. Okay. So now let's say I uh, add something like, some junk value. Okay. Now let's see what happens in this case. What is the value? The original value is, this is Java programming, right? And what it is going to search first, this junk value. If it is able to find this, it is going to replace it with underscore. So now, since this junk value doesn't exist in this string, let us see what is the output. So what is the output? There is no change in the original text, right? Because it is not able to find the value that I want to replace. Correct? So this is how the replace method works. Fine. So now let's proceed further. Split. Okay. This is a very important method, widely used. There are a lot of instances where you might have to use this method, when you start programming. I'll tell you what this is. Okay. And again, let's see what is the return type in this case. Oh, sorry. Dot split. If you see here, what is the return type? First of all, what is the input parameter? What is the argument it is expecting? The argument that it is expecting is a string argument. And what is the return type? It is going to return you a string array. Okay, a string array, right? So now if I use the split method, okay, and if I provide substring based on which I want to split this particular string, okay, so I will mention this as a space. So wherever or whenever it comes across the substring space, it is going to split that particular string. and it is going to store it in an array, a string array. And obviously we have seen what is an array. An array is a placeholder where you can store multiple values, and the index of the array starts from 0, correct? So now what basically this is going to happen is that this one string is going to get split into how many indexes of an array. So there is one space over here, right? So this will get stored in index 0, is will get stored in index 1, then again there is a space here, right? It will get split again over here. Then Java will get stored in index 2, again there is a space. So then programming will get stored in index 3. Okay, this is what it should normally do. Okay, so now let's see what happens here. So uh, let me see if I directly give a system.out.println statement here. Okay, string splitted. Okay. Now let's see if I execute this, what happens. Okay, so so you cannot basically, you know, print an array like that. So I was just trying to see if it works. Obviously it won't work because I have to, if I have to print the content of an array, I can't just mention as the array name itself, right? So I have to give the index value so that I can access the value of that array, isn't it? So now what I need to do is I will say, let's use the concept that we have already covered in our previous session. Okay, so now as you know, this is going to return you a string array. So I have to store it in an string array, obviously, isn't it? So string arr value equal to value dot, okay, string array arr value equal to value dot split. Okay, so now whatever value that gets stored in this array, I want to print it, isn't it? So how do you print all the values of an array? You can use multiple methods. The best method is by using a for each loop, right? So if you remember, for string s colon, so I'm accessing, you know, each element of what array arr value. Okay, and what is the data type of each element of this arr value? It is a string data type, right? So that is, I've mentioned string, you know, a string by the name s is going to access each element of the array arr value. And what I'm going to do with this variable s, I'm simply going to print what? I'm going to say print s. Okay. I can do a little bit of, you know, more um, kind of uh, I'll print something like this. Okay, I will just make it more readable. So what I'm going to do is I've created a integer variable called as count with the initial value as 0. And now what I'm going to do is I'll say value at index, I will say count, which is 0 initially. Okay, again is, right? So what I'm going to do is I said value at index, again a space, at index, what is the count value? It is 0. So at index 0, then again I'm saying, you know, concatenate with a string which says is, and then the actual index value of the array which I'm going to access using this for each loop, right? And I will say count plus plus and proceed. Right? So it should print value at index 0 is this, then value at index 1 is value at index 2 is Java, value at index 3 is programming. So let's see if it works that way. I'm going to execute this now. Perfect, right? So value at index 0 is this, value at index 1 is, value at index 2 is Java, value at index 3 is programming. Right? So we have not only used the method of the string that is there to split the statement, but we have also used our previous session concepts to iterate through that uh, iterate through the array using the for each loop, and then we have also printed the statement in a more readable format using the string concatenation, using the counter variable and things like that. Okay. So, all right, let's proceed further. Let's say value dot mm, what else? Replace, split. mm, okay, substring. Fine. So this is also a very nice method. So what does it do? It so this is like there are two methods of the same name. Okay, just remember this. I'm going to cover it in oops concept of polymorphism, right? So just remember this, that there are two methods in the class string with the name as substring, two methods with the same name, but as you can see there is a difference between the two methods. One method called substring accepts only one integer value, whereas the second method, same name substring, accepts two parameters, which is both integer type, right? So now if I use the first method, which accepts only one input parameter, and I mention some integer value as, let's say, 5, let's see what it returns. Okay, so sys out. Okay, and I'll say substring from index 5 is, right? So what this is going to do, it is going to first check what is at index number 5. So index number 5, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So at index number 5, right, we have the character I. So from I till the end of the string, it is going to print you whatever that lies in between. So index number 5 onwards till the end of the till the end of the string, it is going to return you the value. Okay. So now if I execute this, you see it says substring from index number 5 is, what is the value, is Java programming. Okay, so now same thing, if I use the same method, if I use with two parameters, so let's say I say 5 and 10. Now instead of returning from index 5 till the end of the string, it is going to return you till the index 10. Okay, so if I say 5 is at this particular point, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. Okay, so between 5 and 10, so it basically it will start with index number 5, and whatever the 10th index is there, the 10th index minus 1, so it is going to return you till index number 9. Okay, so I got to know about this just few days back. I earlier I was thinking that it will return till whatever index that I've mentioned over here, but I was wrong. So you will see what I'm trying to say. So if I execute this now, so what it has written is space JA. Okay, so at this particular point, what is the index? We have already seen it is index number 5, right? So 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so at ninth index, whatever the value is, till that particular point, it is returning you the value. So although you have mentioned the end index as 10, it will not return you the value at the 10th index, but a index before that. So what is the index before that? 9, right? So from index number 5 till index number 9, whatever the value is, it is going to return you as is. Okay. So let's say I mentioned 10. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. 10 till, let's say, 20. Okay. Right. So what is index number 10? It is V, right? So 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Okay. So ideally till 20, it should be until this 2 double M, isn't it? But it will return you till index number 19. Basically, it will mean VA space then program with a single M. Okay. So let's see if it works that way. Yeah. VA, which means it started with index number 10 and then it ended till index number 19. So whatever in between, it has returned you that value. Okay. So from index number 10 till 20, but it will return you the value till index 19. Okay. So that's how it works. So yeah, I think we have covered most of them which are necessary. Mm, yeah, maybe a couple of more. So there are two lowercase, two uppercase, right? So I will say two lowercase, right? Mm, and what does it accept? Let me just check again. Two lowercase, yeah, yeah. Okay. So now what this is going to do is, you must have guessed it already. So it is going to return you the value of the string in all lowercase. Okay. So all lowercase value of the string is, okay, whatever I've mentioned, right? T capital. I think there's just one T that is capital, rest all are in lowercase, right? So if I execute this, even T would be now in small, right? So T is in small. Now, similarly, the other way around, if I use the method dot to uppercase, okay, then obviously it is going to print everything in uppercase. Execute this. Sorry, syntax error. Yeah. So if you see here, now everything is in uppercase. This is Java programming. Okay. So now final one, which is value dot trim. Okay, again a very useful method. So trim, as the name suggests, it is going to trim. What it is going to trim? It is going to trim the spaces. Now you might think that it will trim the space which is there between the string. Well, it will not do that. But let's say there are some spaces at the prefix and at the suffix, right? So basically there are some spaces in the beginning and there are some spaces in the end. So if I use this trim method, it is going to cut, or it is going to ignore the spaces that are there in the beginning and at the end. Okay, so I'll explain you how this works. Let's say let me comment out the rest of the code. I will just print first this. The length of the string is. So now with these extra spaces added, earlier it was 24, right? If you remember. So now with this extra spaces added, let's see what is the length. Okay. the length of the string with extra spaces is, okay, then I will say value dot trim, okay. And if you see what is the return type of trim, it is string, right? Okay, so value dot trim, and then uh, this out. Okay, so now what I've done is I'm going to trim that particular string, and then I also want to, on the same string that has been trimmed, I want to check the length now. Okay, so now if you see here, there is this method which is returning me a value string with the trimmed text, right? And then I'm using the same returned value. I'm, you know, you know, storing that value in a parenthesis or in a bracket. And then on that, I'm using another method called as dot length, which we have already seen, so that it is now going to return me the updated length of the string after it has got trimmed. Okay, so now it's like a method on another method. It is like a nested method, you can say, if you want. Okay, now what I'll say is the length of the string after trim is, okay, and then this method. Yes, if you want to see this in full length, the code is like this: system.out.println, the length of the string after trim is, so first I'm going to trim that particular string, then the whatever value that is returned, I am storing it in the parenthesis or the round bracket, and then I'm using another method called dot length to the value that has been returned, so that I can tell you what is the length of the trimmed string. Okay, so now I'm going to run this and I'm going to show you. So first, what it has said, the length of the string with extra spaces is, so whatever extra spaces that I've added, what is the length? It is showing as 31. Initially it was 24, right, without these extra spaces, but now it is showing it as 31. However, after I use this trim method, it has removed those extra spaces, and on top of that, if I check what is the length of the string now, it is giving me the original value as 24. Correct? So this is what trim method would do. Okay, so value dot, let me just see. Yeah, yeah, so I think I have covered most of them. There's nothing more that I intend to cover in this topic. You can, you know check more methods, as you wish, but I think this should suffice for most of your programming needs. Okay, so this was about string method. Now let's proceed with the most important topic in Java, which is called as OOPS. Okay, OOP, object oriented programming, public static void main, or maybe, okay. So now we are going to see what is object oriented programming, what is a class, what is an attribute, what is a method. Okay, so although we have got some idea about it, because we are dealing with classes and objects and methods so far, isn't it? But just formally to tell you, a class is nothing but, in a very simple layman language, it is a placeholder, you can say, inside which you can write different methods, you can store different attributes, attributes meaning variables or constant, right? So you can store an attribute, you can store a method inside that particular class. Okay, so it is important for you to have a class so that you can, write your methods, and you can store your variables, you can store your constants, right? So if you see here, all of this, the method, the string variable, the integer variable, everything is stored inside this class. I cannot write a string, or I cannot declare and initialize a string, a variable, or an integer variable, or a method outside the class. Okay, so let me show you this. If I say string, uh, you know string name equals to, Bob, for example, although the syntax is correct, there's nothing wrong. I have declared a string variable by the name, and it is storing some value, right? It is also ended with a semicolon, which is again a perfect Java syntax, but it is outside the class. I cannot write anything outside the class, right? So in order to tell Java compiler that this is something, a valid a Java line of code which it needs to execute, right? You have to mention that inside a class only. Okay, so if I say same thing inside a class, it gives you no error, right? Similarly, if I create a method, let's say a method by the name public void, uh, you know print. Print is the name of the method, right? And right, it is giving you some error, right? Syntax error on token void or whatever. Even if I say int, and if I say return, and still it is going to give you some error, right? However, if I cut paste it and place it inside the class, you see there are no errors, absolutely correct. So what I'm trying to tell you is that a class is nothing but uh, you know placeholder which will allow you to write your Java programming code, which can be executed by Java compiler. Anything outside the class will not be executed. In fact, it cannot be compiled. It will give you an error, right? So that is basically what Java class is. Okay. Now, before that, what is object oriented programming? So earlier to this object oriented programming concept, whatever languages were there, programming languages, it used to get executed in a sequence. Okay, so whatever code I've written in line number 1, 2, 3, 4, it used to get executed in a sequence. Okay, so what used to happen is that there were a lot of disadvantages, meaning you cannot use reusable concepts, reusable methods, or you could not use you know something that is already present in some other file. You cannot access it over here, and instead of that you have to again repeat the same line of code over and over again. So that is what we call as a sequential programming language. However, with this object oriented programming, you can create an object of a particular class, and whatever attributes, whatever methods that are there in that particular class can be accessed by any other class if that particular class or method has the specific access modifier associated with it. Okay, so I'll tell you what is access modifier later, but just to give you an example, now this is an access modifier. What this is, it is called as a public keyword. So what basically this indicates, as the name suggests, public, right? So it is accessible to the entire public, meaning it is accessible across the entire project. So this is the project name, named as day 3, right? So no matter how many class files I create over here, no matter how many different packages, and inside that package I create some other class files, this particular class will be accessible across all packages, across all other classes inside this project. Okay, so now let's say if I create this variable, okay, we call it as an attribute, a class attribute, or if I create a method. Okay, so what was the method that I created earlier? Yeah, the sprint method. Okay, all of this would be accessible to other classes, right? I just have to create an object of this class and then access its attributes and methods wherever I want. So now once I have written this code wherever I want, no matter how many times I want, I can simply, refer to the object of this class and, call this attribute or call this method, instead of, writing the same line of code over and over again where I want. Right, so this is the advantage of object oriented programming. Okay, so I'm not going to go into detail technical definition of what is object oriented programming, blah blah blah, because I am trying to, explain these concepts in a very simple layman terminology. I may not be perfect, dictionary definition of object oriented programming, but I'm sure you understood what I'm trying to tell you, you know because to understand the concept is important. You don't have to by heart the textbook definition of, the concept, right? Because you're not going to appear for a, written exam of these concepts. You need to know what the concept is, and you need to know how to apply it, right? So that is the agenda of these sessions. Okay, so now I've told you what is a class, I've told you what is, an object oriented programming, I've told you what is the importance of this class. Whatever code that you want to write, you have to mention it inside this class only. Okay, and I told you what is public, right? So this particular public will make this particular class and its attributes and methods accessible across all the entire project. Okay, so this is a class. Now what is an object? So how do I create an object of this particular class? So there is a syntax, how to access or how to create an object of this class. Okay, so now let me first create a main method, public static void main, because we will need this main method to trigger our code, right? Without this main method, it will not trigger the code. So I will say public static void main string args. Okay, so this is the basic syntax of, the main method. We have covered this in day 1, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, here is the syntax. Okay, so you have to mention the class name. So what is the class name? It is oop class name. Then you mention the object name. Okay, so I will say whatever, I'll say obj. You can give any name. It is like giving the name to your variable. You can have any sensible name. So I've just mentioned it as obj. Okay, so obj equal to new, and then again the class name, open and closed round bracket, and ended with a semicolon. So class name, the object name, whatever you want to give, equal to new, and then again the class name, open and close round bracket and a semicolon. So now what is going to happen is that with this I have created an object of this class. Now if I use this object obj, and if I say dot, you can see I'm able to access its attribute called as name, right? You see, I'm able to access this name. right? And not only that, I'm not only able to access the attribute, okay, I'm also going to access its method. So what is the method that I've written? Method is print, isn't it? So I will say print, okay. So you're getting my point. How do I create an object of this class and how I'm able to access its attribute and method, right? So now, same way, no matter which other class, I write my code, I have to use the same thing. I have to create a class of this object and I have to use its attribute and method, whichever I want to use, n number of times, right? So you're able to understand the importance of this. I don't have to write the same line of code multiple times. I just have to create an object and just use these, calling attribute and method line. That's it, right? So imagine this. Imagine in this particular method. Let me say this out. My name is. Now this particular method has just this one name, isn't it? One line of code, isn't it? But imagine there is this method which has 100 lines of code inside it. Just hypothetically, in real life scenario, there are methods which do some complex activity. It has 20 lines of code, 50 lines of code, or whatever, right? So now wherever you want to use the same 20 lines of code or 50 lines of code, instead of copy pasting all that 20, 50 lines of code over and over again, what you're going to do is basically going to create an object of this class, call out that method, you know any number of times that you want, and those 20, 50, 100 lines of code, whatever is present inside that method, will be executed those many number of times, right? So it saves a lot of time, it saves a lot of effort. It reduces the number of errors that you would do if you would have to write those same lines of code over and over again. This is the beauty and the power of object oriented programming. Okay, so now let's say uh, mm, I mention here as Rahul. Okay, so what I've done is I've created an object of this class. I've accessed the attribute here, and I have now replaced the value which was earlier as Bob as Rahul. And let me do this. Okay, let me. Okay, now before I do that, so now you have understood what is a class. You understood what is an attribute, right? Attribute is nothing but those variables or constants inside that class. Okay, you have also seen what is an object, right? So I told you how to create an object, what is the advantage of using the object of the class, right? And now we are moving to methods. So method is nothing but what you have seen right now, right? So method can have no input parameter, right? So it doesn't require any parameter to execute this line of code. You have seen uh, how it works, right? So now let me show you this. Okay, let me first execute this first and show you uh, how this works. So you see from here I have printed my name is Rahul, correct? From this particular line, from line number 13, I have printed what is mentioned at line number 7. Okay, so now this particular method doesn't require any input parameter. Okay, now let me tell you, you know or let me show you how a method can also accept some input parameter. So I will say string. I have to mention what is the data type of that input parameter which it accepts. So it is string, and it's say, let's say, nm. Okay, string nm. And what it is going to do,
is that it is going to say my name is NM. So whatever the user provide in this particular value, so whenever I call this method and whatever I mention in this bracket, it is going to get accepted and it is going to get stored in this variable nm, and then this variable is in turn being used inside this method. Okay, so now if you see here, it is now giving me an error at line number 13. Why? Because earlier it was not accepting any input parameter, so this is working perfectly fine. But now, since I made some changes to the method definition itself, now it is expecting me to add an argument which is of string variable. So now I will say object obj.name. You see, so earlier this name had the value Bob. I created an object of this class. I access the attribute over here obj.name, and I also changed its value from Bob to Rahul. And now I'm passing this attribute as an input parameter to the method called as print. So now what it is going to print? It is going to print my name is what I have passed obj.name. What does the value store is stored in obj.name? It is Rahul. So it is going to say my name is Rahul. Okay, so let's see this. My name is Rahul. Now let's say I don't change the value over here. Okay, I comment this line. So now what is going to happen? It is going to print me the value as Bob. Okay, so if I say run, it is printing me the value as Bob. Okay. Similarly, if I give an input parameter, let's say an integer value, okay, 12. So will it work? No, of course not, right? Because the definition of the method says that it is accepting only a string input parameter. However, I'm giving an integer value as an input parameter. So it will say, no, it doesn't work. Change method this to this, right? So it will not accept, right? So I will say, I will go back and then say obj.name. So now a method can either have no input parameter, it can have one input parameter, or can have multiple input parameters also. So now let's say I have a second input parameter int. Let's say I say age. Okay. I use the second input parameter as I am, right, so and so years old. Okay. Now although I'm passing one input parameter obj.name which is of string, but now I also have to pass an integer value, right? So I will say comma 35. Okay. So now what it is going to do is it is going to print two values. First of all, it is going to accept two values as the input parameter. One is string nm and the other is int age, and then those two values are getting passed in the method as print statement nm and age, and whatever I have passed here, it is getting used inside this method. So my name is Bob. Okay, why Bob? Because obj.name, what is obj.name? It is stored as Bob, right? However, if I change the value of that obj.name inside this method, it is going to print as Rahul, and whatever value I've provided as integer, it is going to get printed over here. So if I now execute this, it is going to say my name is Rahul, I am 35 years old. Okay, so this is a method with multiple input parameters. So now there is also one type of method that returns some value, right? So we have already seen in the string method, right, how many methods return different type of values. So if I want this particular method to return certain value, what I have to do is, instead of mentioning this as void, so when I mention void, that means that this particular method doesn't return any sort of value. Okay. However, if I want to return any value, I have to mention what would be the return data type. So data type, let's say, uh, okay, it doesn't make sense, but just to show you an example, I will say string. Now, when I mention return type as string, I have to mention something over here as return. Okay. And I have to mention something in string format. Okay. So if you see return whatever, blah, blah. Okay. I'll say uh, method has returned this string. Okay. I mean, this is, I mean, it doesn't make sense. Okay. But just to explain the concept. So if I mention a return type as string, I need to return, use the return keyword over here, and I have to mention a value which matches the return type that I've mentioned in the declaration. Okay. If I say return type as int, then it is going to not work like this. It is going to give me an error, right? So I have to return an integer value. So let's say return 10. And then since I'm returning certain value, so wherever I call this method, I have to kind of store it in an integer variable, or you simply print it like this. Okay, let's see this if this works. Okay, execute. Yeah, so what has happened, it has said my it has first of all gone inside this print method. It has said my name is so and so, Rahul. I am 35 years old. And not just that, it has also returned the integer value as 10, and it has got printed along with this, you know, 10. You're getting my point, right? Or maybe just to, make it more logical, what I'll do is I'll show you this. Okay, public int add. Okay, I'll say int num1 num2 int num2. Okay, return num1 plus num2. Okay, a simple addition method I've created, and now I have to make some changes, right? So obj dot, so there is no print method now. Obj dot add, and what it is going to accept, two integer values, isn't it? So I will say 10 comma 20, right? And there's no need of this obj dot name any longer. If I execute this, it is returning me the value as 30, right? So now this makes sense, right? Okay, so a method that accepts multiple parameters, it also returns certain value, so you have to mention this as the return keyword, and you have to return a value that matches the data type of what I've mentioned over here. Okay, so this was about method. Okay, so classes, attributes, objects, and methods. Okay, we are done with this. Now let's start with inheritance, and I will cover single inheritance for today, and the remaining one I will cover in the next session. So what is inheritance? So inheritance, you know um, as the name suggests, right, it is inheriting certain things from someone else, right? So a classic example, a father has a property, you know and a son or a daughter, inherits the father's wealth or the property, right? Why? Because the son or the daughter doesn't have to work the same thing, or the son or the child, son or the daughter doesn't have to work again to achieve the same property or the same wealth again, right? So it is reusing, you can say, what has already been achieved by his or her father, right? So again, I'm very, explaining in very simple layman language, and now I will show you the concept, how it is done in Java. Okay, so now let's say there is a class called as, let's name it parent class. Okay, parent class, uh let's say, uh I have an integer num1, okay, which has the value as 10. Then I have method, the same method I will use, public int add int uh, int a, okay, int b, okay, return a plus b. Okay, so now this is the parent class which already has an attribute called as num1, and it has the value as 10, and it also has a method which is an add method which accepts two input parameters, integer a and integer b, and it is going to return the addition of these two input parameters. Okay, so this is the property, you can say, of the parent. It has an attribute and it has a method, right? So now let's say I have a child class, right? I will mention child class. Okay. Now child class wants to access the parent class's attribute and method. Okay, so how would it do, right? Instead of the child class, writing the same thing here again, okay, it's a duplicate effort, isn't it? So he might as well access the parent class's attributes and method, and then he can have its own attribute and method also, but he need not write the same line of code what is already written in a parent class. So now, in order to access the parent class's attribute and methods, or in other words, if it has to uh, inherit the parent class's attributes and methods, it have to use a keyword called as extends. Okay, extends, and then the class name. What is the class name? Parent class. Okay, so now with this keyword extends and the class name parent class, this particular child class has now access to its parent class's attribute and its method. Okay, so now let's say I write, or maybe let me show you by creating another class, let's say calling class, or let's say main class, which will have a main method. Okay. If you see clearly, in the parent class and in the child class, there is no main method. So I don't want the code to be triggered from either parent or child class. I have created a third class by the name main class, and it has a main method. So now what I'm going to do is take a look. Okay, I'm going to create an object, okay, of this child class. So you have already seen how to create an object, right? So class name, then the object name, I have mentioned obj child equal to new, and again the class name, open and close round brackets, colon, sorry, semicolon, right? So now if you see obj child, if I use this obj child dot, you see I am able to access num1, right? And I'm able to access the add method. Okay. So although this particular child class has nothing of its own, okay, but since it has inherited the parent class, so whatever the parent class has, automatically this child class inherits. Okay. So now from the main class, I have created an object of this child class. And if you see here clearly, right, there's nothing inside this child class. Still, I would be able to access the parent class's attributes and method. Because it comes by default in the child class since it has inherited the parent class using the keyword extends. Okay. So now I will show you what I can do from here. I will say there are parameters that it accepts, right? So obj child dot num1, because num1 has already a value 10, right? So I'm passing num1 10 as the first input parameter, and I will say 50 as the second input parameter, right? And let me just print this as is. Okay. So now what you see is that it is going to print me the value as 60. So now this is what inheritance does. So a parent has one attribute or a method. A child class has nothing of its own, right? But it has accessed the parent class. It has inherited the parent class by using the extends keyword, right? And whenever I create an object of this child class, I would automatically get access to its parent class's attributes and methods. Okay. And now let's say I create some attribute over here as well. Let's say I create a string attribute name equals to blah blah, you know, Alex. I'll say public public void print name. Okay. String value this out name. Oh, sorry, value. Okay. So now the child class has its own attributes, its own method, and it also has its parents attribute and parents method. Okay. So now if I create an object of this child class, not only would I have access to its parent class's attributes and methods, but also the child class's attributes and method. Okay. So now using the same object that I have created, if I say obj child dot, now you see I have access to the child class, the child class's string attribute name and the child class's attribute. Okay, yeah, child class's method print name as well, right? And I would rather say obj dot child name. First, I will change it to uh, let's say Ram. Okay, and then I will use this to print the name which I have now changed from Alex to Ram. Okay, so now let's see how it works. So first of all, I have accessed the parent attribute of the child and it has done the addition of the values that I have passed. So obj child.num1, which is in the parent class, 10, and then I have added 50 over here. So it has done the addition of 10 and 50. It has returned the value as 60. Okay, here it has returned it. Now the child attribute name, which was Alex, I have accessed it over here, but I have changed its value to Ram. And then I'm using this print name method and I'm passing the objchild.name the updated value as its input parameter, and I'm getting it printed as well as Ram. Correct? So you see, this is how the inheritance works. You extend the parent class. You have access to the parent class attribute as well as the attributes and the methods of your child class also. And using this, you know, object of the child class, you are able to access both of them. Correct? So this is a single inheritance. So when I say single inheritance, it means, uh, let me show you using Paint. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, a Paint, MS Paint, just to have some diagram, to show you. So now this is a parent and this is a child. Okay, in the parent, it has an attribute, right? It has an attribute, whatever, int num1 40, and it also has method. Let's say public void or public int add a comma int b. Exactly what we have seen now, right? So this is the parent class. Now this is the child class. It wants to access this parent class's attributes and methods. So I will have this accessed over here by using inheritance, using the keyword extends. Okay, and it will not only have access to the parent class's content, but now it will also have access, I mean, obviously it will have its own attributes, like what we have seen here, string name equals to Alex or whatever, and it will also have its own method which will, print public void print string val. Okay, so now the child has its own attribute and method, and now it also has access to the parent class's attributes and method. So there is one parent and one child. So this is called as a single inheritance. Okay, only one parent, one child class accessing one parent class. Okay, so this is single inheritance. There are multiple other types of inheritance. So single inheritance, multi-level inheritance, hierarchical, multiple, hybrid, right? So we will see that in the next session. But for today, I think we have covered a lot. I hope this video was helpful, and I'll see you, in the next session. Thank you so much.